Hello, my name is Duncan Cuthell and I am the Chief Executive of Edinburgh City Mission. I've been working in that role for the past 3 years after working with London City Mission for 12 years. So I'm originally from Scotland, from East Lothian, and I lived and worked all of my life in Scotland until moving down to London in 2004. And I studied for a year and then I worked with London City Mission for 12 years. So I came back to Edinburgh 3 years ago to work with Edinburgh City Mission, and we've been doing a whole lot of different things over those past 3 years, some of which I'll mention during this talk. So I got to know Dave through the City Mission Movement UK. We meet together. Our Broth Town Mission is the only town mission, as far as I know, in the City Mission movement. Anyway, so through that, Dave and I got to know each other, and I've been up to Arbroath and have spoken there at the town mission before, so some of you might recognise my face. And today I'm going to speak about praying for the poor, is the title that Dave gave me. And the angle that I've taken is really just to talk about the poor, to stir up our passion and concern for the poor. And from that, I guess I hope that will stir up a concern to pray for people who are on low income or out of work or whatever. The poor is maybe, it's a bit of a pejorative term. I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but it does. It is helpful in other ways. So I guess people who are struggling with poverty, people who have got the biggest challenges in life that are caused by having the least resources, that's who we're talking about this morning. And I'll refer to folk in that situation as the poor. And I hope you're okay working with me with that terminology. So a recent report showed that people living in Niddrie, which is one of the most deprived housing estates in Edinburgh, have got an average life expectancy of 63 and a half years. And that compares with people at the opposite extreme in Edinburgh, the West End of Edinburgh, whose life expectancy is 85 years. That's a huge difference of more than 20 years, depending on where you live. Well, I guess that, it raises the question, what causes that difference? Why is there such a massive difference in life expectancy for people who live in Niddrie compared to people who live in the West End of Edinburgh? And there's a spectrum, obviously, across the rest of the city, depending on which part of the city you live in. And there are many reasons for that difference, but the catch-all can be summed up in one word, which is poverty. Poverty is the reason why people in Niddrie can have a life expectancy of 63 and a half years compared to 85 years if you live in the West End of Edinburgh. And as we emerge from lockdown, one of the tragedies that we've seen, and it's no surprise, is that the poorest people in society have suffered the most from lockdown. And again, it provokes the question, why? Well, it's a combination of reasons, partly because their living conditions are often less stable, which creates a vulnerability. More of them are in jobs which were less secure, meaning that more people lost their jobs when lockdown started if you were poor. And they're more liable to have other health problems, which makes them more vulnerable, and more vulnerable to COVID-19, in fact. And the official government statistics on that show that people living in poorer areas are twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than people in less deprived areas. So ill health and poverty often go hand in hand. For these and many other reasons, the poor are more likely to suffer from food poverty, and that's of particular interest for us in Edinburgh City Mission. We run a network of 8 food banks that are all church-based, and a team of volunteers from the local church or 2 or 3 surrounding churches come in and help to run the food banks, and we do the referrals, and our team go in and help, and we work in partnership with them. In the first half of this year, we did over 1,000 referrals to these food banks, which fed over 2,000 people, because some of those referrals are for individuals and some are for families. And on average, each of them was giving them enough food, they'd come back week by week, but enough food to feed them for 5 weeks, to help them get through a crisis. So that's a huge amount of food that we're giving out to help people through a particularly difficult moment in their lives. And in the first month of lockdown, our numbers have gone up during lockdown. We have been doing more referrals, maybe not as big an increase as we had expected, although maybe that's yet to come. But in the first month of lockdown, the UK's biggest food bank provider, the Trussell Trust, released their statistics, which showed that they had an 89% increase in food bank referrals compared to last year. The chief executive of Child Poverty Action Group, Alison Garnham, she recently said, "No parent wants to depend on charity to feed their own child, but it is clear that food banks are becoming the only option for a growing number of families whose finances have all but collapsed because of COVID-19. Struggle is turning to real hardship." At the New Wine Conference in 2017, Philip North, who is the Bishop of Burnley, gave a highly publicised talk which was called Hope for the Poor. And in his talk, one of the memorable lines, so it's actually a very stirring, very moving, very provocative talk, and one of his lines which really struck me was, he said, "If we want renewal, we must start with the poor. If we fail to proclaim the good news to the poor, we lose the right and the authority to proclaim the good news to anyone, anywhere." Well, I want to reflect a bit on Jesus and his engagement with poverty, and to think that through. And as I say, hopefully what I share this morning will stir us to pray for people who are experiencing poverty. That's really what I hope, by being quite challenging. I've got some challenging stuff to say, and hopefully that will stir us. Jesus himself was poor. Sometimes we forget that we follow a poor man, and he focused his ministry on the poor. He was born into poverty. He was born in a stable, remember, and then he became a refugee. And as an adult, the gospel writers tell us that he had no place to rest his head. He had no home of his own. After a while of preaching around Galilee, Jesus returned to his hometown where he grew up, Nazareth. Remember, he was Jesus the Nazarene. And he was given an opportunity to preach in the local synagogue that he would have grown up in, that he attended as a child, as a teenager, as a young man. And most of us will be familiar with what happened when Jesus was given that opportunity to preach in his hometown of Nazareth in the synagogue. In chapter 4 of Luke's Gospel, Luke tells us that Jesus stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found a place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. The way that Jesus reads this passage from Isaiah, it sounds like he's declaring it as his own personal mission. It sounds as though Jesus is saying that the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on him. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, Jesus quotes from Isaiah, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Could that really be what Jesus meant? Was Jesus actually talking about, was he applying that to himself? Well, after he'd finished the reading, then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the tenant and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. But that isn't all that Luke says. Luke tells us that Jesus wasn't finished. Jesus goes on to make an audacious and shocking statement. He began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." This verse from Isaiah it's Jesus' manifesto. This is his declaration of intent. He is saying that he is the fulfillment of what Isaiah was talking about. Jesus said that he was going to proclaim good news to the poor. He was going to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind. He was going to set the oppressed free, and he was going to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. By quoting Isaiah, Jesus is claiming that his ministry will be a continuation of what God's heart was for his people. But more than that Jesus will fulfill what Isaiah spoke of. Jesus is placing himself in the prophetic tradition, aligning himself with the God of justice that the people in his hometown of Nazareth worshipped and followed. But more than that, he's saying he will fulfill that prophecy. Let me pick up on one phrase from this manifesto. Jesus said that he'd come to set the oppressed free. And that begs a question, begs different questions. One of the questions is who's oppressed in Jesus' time? Well, all of his countrymen were, and countrywomen, everyone in Israel at the time was oppressed because they were under Roman occupation. And so there's an expectation that Jesus is going to set them free from their Roman oppression. But that isn't what Jesus was talking about. Jesus is talking about a different kind of oppression in that particular situation. But anyway, and we could, I don't have time to go right into that. But what the other question it begs for me is, who is oppressed in our society? Who's oppressed today? Is anyone claiming to be oppressed? Is anyone drawing attention to their oppression at the start of this new decade? Should we be facing up to oppression in our society and thinking about how we can engage with it? I don't know if that provokes anything in your mind, but for me, it's very clear that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people are asking everyone to stop and consider how they are being treated today. Racial oppression isn't just historic, it's an everyday occurrence in Britain today. When I worked for London City Mission, we had two main maps that we kind of often referred to when we were thinking about how we would work, where we would put our resources, where we would try to serve local churches. And those two main maps, one was a multiple deprivation map. This map shows where the greatest poverty is located in London, based on 7 different measures, and there's a multiple deprivation map of Scotland that you can look up, the Scottish Government produces, and that's really helpful as well for identifying the areas of poverty. Different measures of deprivation are used in the multiple deprivation maps of London or of Scotland or wherever. The other map is a map showing where different ethnic groups lived. So, for example, the borough of Newham in East London is nearly 50% Asian, 46% Asian in the last record that was taken. And the most striking thing about these two different maps is that they map onto each other. Where there's the greatest poverty in London, those areas are the same areas as where there's the highest density of ethnic minorities. And what that tells us, I think, is that you cannot separate poverty issues from ethnic identity issues. Not always, but very often the two are correlated. The two map onto each other. So not only is there a correlation I was talking about earlier in this talk between poverty and sickness, with more people suffering from COVID-19, dying from COVID-19, who are poor, but there's a correlation between ethnicity and poverty. So can we go so far as to say that there's a triage between the three, between poverty, ill health and ethnicity? I think so. I think that often those things map right onto each other. Poverty, ill health and ethnicity. So to stick with COVID-19 and the effects that that's having, the statistics are showing that people from with a black ethnicity particularly are more than 4 times as likely to die from COVID-19 than those who are of white ethnicity. Well, you know, we could go into that in more depth, but Jesus said that he had come to set the oppressed free. And I've posed the question, who is oppressed in our society today? And an answer to that, one grouping of people who are claiming to be oppressed are black, Asian and minority ethnic people. I'm going to be bold and ask you a question. Are you racist? That's a difficult question to ask. It's a difficult question to hear. Most of us probably respond to that question in one of these different ways. I'll put some different possible ways that you've responded in your mind to that question. One is to say quite clearly and categorically, no, I'm not. Okay. Another response is to say, I don't think I am. I would hope that I'm not. I would hope that I try to treat everyone the same as each other. Another response might be, how dare you suggest that I'm racist? I don't know. And you know, I'm being provocative. It's a provocative question, for sure. Well, what if I asked you, do you have any prejudices? Do you discriminate against other people? And they're uncomfortable questions. I find them uncomfortable questions, and I think I find it difficult to say no to those questions. Do I have any prejudices? Do I discriminate against other people? I'd like to think that I don't. I would hope that I don't, but I probably do. And we need to face up to that. I feel it's really essential to educate ourselves on racial issues. We can't just brush this under the carpet. We can't just bury our head in the sand and hope it's going to go away. And we need to look into the claims that are being made by black, Asian and minority ethnic people, and we need to act. Jesus didn't just listen to claims of oppression. Jesus didn't just educate himself on the oppression of his day. Jesus came to set the oppressed free, to be actively involved in ending their oppression. We have to take these claims seriously. So in Edinburgh City Mission, it starts at home, doesn't it? In Edinburgh City Mission, we're starting to step into this ourselves. We're one of the small steps that we're taking is that we're getting a popular book. There's, you can find the names of different books that explore these issues, and we're taking one of those books and we're going to read it together as a team, and we're going to just delve into what are implications for us. Do we really understand the issues? That's a small step, but we also would like to have discussions with different churches across the city to explore racial identity, ethnic identity, and what our response to that is, and how we behave, how we react, how we engage with people who are different to ourselves, who've got a different ethnicity or different skin colour to ourselves. So Jesus claimed that his ministry was a continuation of Judaism. He placed himself in the prophetic tradition, aligning himself with the God of justice, but his application of Isaiah 61 was also radically new and different. In Luke's Gospel further on in chapter 7, we're told that Jesus was viewed as being a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Jesus was radical. Throughout Jesus' ministry, we see that he had a particular care and concern for children, for the poor, for the sick, for the weak, for the lowly, for the ostracised. I want to reflect on one of those stories just to show that that's not an idle claim, it's not an empty claim. He definitely did. If you're not convinced of that, sit down and read through the Gospels. Just read through the Gospels and ask yourself the question, who is this individual person that Jesus is interacting with here? Who is this next individual person? What sort of person? Where did they fit into society? And again and again and again, we'll see that they're poor, that they're sick, that they're weak, that they're ostracised. They were people on the margins. They were the lepers. They were the people who were hated by others. Those were the people that Jesus particularly reached out to. So this story I want to look at is in chapter 2 of Mark's Gospel, where Jesus heals somebody who's been suffering, who's been paralysed for years. And picking up on the story, it says, a few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door. And he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralysed man, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralysed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately, Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralysed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home." He got up, took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this." What do we learn from this story? Well, an observation that you could make is that poverty and sickness create disadvantage in life. Sometimes people who are poor or sick need other people to intervene on their behalf to help them. In order for them to have the same opportunities as everyone else, they need somebody else to step in and support them or be their advocate. If it wasn't for this man's friends, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet Jesus and be healed by him. In and of himself, he couldn't have got himself in front of Jesus, but his friends enabled that encounter to happen. Another observation is that it takes initiative to create new pathways and opportunities for people who are sick and poor. The friends made an opening in the roof by digging through it and then lowering the man, lowering his mat, lowering him down on the mat. That's initiative, digging a hole in the roof for him. And sometimes it takes initiative to create new pathways and opportunities for people who are at a disadvantage in life. Jesus' mission was to heal people spiritually and physically. He was all about teaching the good news and demonstrating the good news. in this story, Jesus was preaching to the whole crowd, to everyone who wanted to hear. But he focused on one particular person in the crowd, one who was weak and one who was particularly in need. I mean, this is incredible. The good news of Jesus is for everyone. It's for the crowds. He spoke to everyone. He gave everyone the opportunity to hear the good news and respond to it. But he focused on the poor and the vulnerable. If you read through the Gospels, please do it. It's unavoidable. There is something in God's heart. There is something in how Jesus relates that shows a bias towards those who are sick and poor and ostracised. So how can we pray for the poor? Well, first of all, we need to inform ourselves. We need to know what's going on. Where is the greatest poverty in my community? Get the map, map it. Look into that. Where is the greatest poverty in your community? Where is the greatest poverty in my community in Edinburgh? There's 5 large housing estate areas in Edinburgh and 4 smaller ones. And as a team, we know where they are. We know what churches there are in those areas. We want to be working particularly with those churches, supporting outreach, particularly in the housing estate areas in Edinburgh. So we've mapped it. We've educated ourselves on where the poverty is. There's more work that we could do in that, and we would like to do that. But who is actively involved in helping those who are on low incomes, on those who are facing the biggest challenges in life? Who's already doing it? Can we come alongside them? Can we support them? Can we help them? Can we pray for what they're doing? Who is taking the good news of Jesus to these people? What are they doing? If Jesus has that bias towards the poor, which I believe that he did, I believe that we should too. So who are the people that are doing it? Let's support them, the people who have that bias towards helping the poor. And so, so organisations like Edinburgh City Mission, we produce regular prayer updates. If people want to pray specifically into what we're doing, if they want to get to know our team by name, if they want to know the particular emphasis that Natalia and Lydia, who's working with her at the moment, working with refugees and asylum seekers, or a particular emphasis that Andy or Charity or Miles or Sarah have, then they can learn about each of those different members of our team and what they're doing through our prayer updates. And you can do the same for many different organisations working in different places in Scotland or overseas, wherever you feel led, wherever you want to pray into. And it's really not for me to be prescriptive on that, but pray for something. Look, have a look, dig around, and pray into the work that people are doing to help poor people have transformative experiences in terms of their own challenges and disadvantages in life, but also to have transformative experiences of God, of following Jesus, of receiving the gospel and having their lives changed through the Holy Spirit's work in their lives. So in conclusion, we want to follow in Jesus' footsteps. The good news of the gospel is for everyone, but Jesus is particularly concerned for the weak and the poor and the vulnerable and the despised. Jesus saw the whole person. We need physical wholeness and spiritual wholeness. Jesus ministered physically and spiritually to bring wholeness to people, to bring life and health to people physically and spiritually. The good news of the gospel is for the whole person. It brings physical well-being and spiritual well-being. And we should inform ourselves about those who are engaged in helping the poor and pray for them, particularly for those who are sharing the good news of Jesus with them. I want to finish with a quote from Philip North again, the Bishop of Burnley, that he shared at the New Wine Conference in 2017. And he said, if we want renewal, we must start with the poor. if we fail to proclaim the good news to the poor, we'll lose the right and the authority to proclaim the good news to anyone, anywhere. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.